It was a soft Sunday morning, the kind that made me want to pull the curtains just halfway open and let the sun paint stripes across the floor. My daughter had invited a few people over for brunch, her friends, some colleagues, even the neighbor from across the street, who always smelled of lavender oil. I wore my floral scarf and a dusty blue cardigan. I thought I looked quite lovely. My hair was freshly curled, and I had even dabbed on a bit of rose lipstick, the same shade I used on the day she graduated. When everyone had settled down, plates clinking, mimosa glasses sparkling, I stood by the patio door and called out, "Let's get a photo together." I was smiling, holding my old Polaroid like it was some fragile heirloom, which to me it was. The group lined up hesitating, and someone muttered, "Oh, do we have to?" My daughter laughed and waved me off. "We'll get one on my phone later, Mom. Something that fits the vibe." I didn't quite know what she meant by that, but I sat back down quietly, folding my hands into my lap. After the brunch, when the guests had left and the plates were cleared, I asked her, "Can you send me that photo you took?" She looked at me over her shoulder while spritzing eucalyptus spray into the air and said, "I'll post it later, don't worry." That night, I opened my tablet and tapped through her social media. There it was, a polished, carefully filtered group shot in front of the ivy wall. Everyone smiling. Plates arranged perfectly like something out of a lifestyle magazine. But I wasn't in it. Not cropped to the side, not standing at the edge, not hidden behind someone's head. I simply wasn't there. I blinked at the screen for a long time, wondering if maybe she had posted the wrong picture, so I scrolled down, looked through her story highlights. Nothing. It was as if I hadn't existed at all that day. My stomach turned, not from rage, no. It was something quieter, the way your breath catches when you miss a step in the dark, a little jolt of, "Oh, I see now." I didn't bring it up, not then, not the next day either. What would I even say? That my own daughter had erased me from a picture, like you'd swipe a fingerprint off a mirror, that I was no longer part of the image she wanted to show the world. Days passed, and I told myself maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she just wanted a more streamlined aesthetic, whatever that meant. But something inside me had begun to fray just slightly. Not unraveling yet, but loosening like the hem of a dress that no longer fits quite right. I sat on the patio that evening, watching the wind ripple through the rosemary bushes I'd planted years ago. She used to help me with those barefoot and muddy, her hair wild and knotted with dandelion fluff. Back then, she'd say things like, "Let's pretend we live in a fairy garden, Mommy." Now it was marble countertops and brand consultants, and airbrushed memories. I sipped my tea and tried to swallow down the silence that had settled between us. But it didn't go down easy. It clung to my throat, like lint on old wool. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before I was no longer welcome in the world my daughter was creating for herself. Not truly. I was tolerated, maybe. Like a decorative item, too sentimental to throw away, but never truly loved enough to display. A few days after that brunch, I found myself scrolling again, not out of obsession, but out of habit, one I hadn't yet broken. There she was, my daughter, her face angled just so, the light caressing her cheekbones, like it had been instructed to. A caption read, "Brunch vibes with my people." The comments flowed in so chic, obsessed with this setup. "You look ousing." And I just stared. My thumb hovered over the screen like it didn't quite know what to do. I zoomed in foolishly, hoping maybe, just maybe, I'd see a glimpse of my sleeve in the background, a shadow, a reflection in the glass. But no, I was gone. She had taken the memory and trimmed it, smoothed it, and shared it with the world, as if I had never been there. And it wasn't just this photo. I looked through her feed again, post after post, and in all of them I was either missing or filtered into invisibility. Sometimes she'd tag people, and I'd see her friends, old neighbors, even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. But me, nothing. Once I used to be her center, her anchor. She clung to my legs in preschool and cried when I left the room. She used to draw pictures of us stick figures, holding hands standing in front of our little yellow house. I still had one taped inside a cupboard in the laundry room. She called us Mommy and me forever. But now I was too much, too frumpy, too floral, too visible. I remember the day she told me she'd be rebranding her page, rebranding her life, really. She said she wanted clean lines and cohesive storytelling. I laughed and asked, "What does that make me, a plot hole?" She didn't laugh. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "You're a little off-theme, Mom, but don't take it personally." Off-theme, like a pillow that doesn't match the couch, like a dish that doesn't pair with the wine. That was the moment it hit me, not like a thunderclap, but like drizzle on a coat you forgot to waterproof. I wasn't just not included. I was being intentionally removed. My presence didn't fit the image she wanted to show the world, and so it was quietly deleted. I kept my mouth shut like always. I was raised that way, raised to make peace, to swallow words like bitter pills. My mother used to say, "A lady's strength is in her silence." But that silence, I was learning, could also be mistaken for agreement, for absence, for irrelevance. Later that week, she asked if I could help fold some laundry while she packed for a weekend retreat with her online community, some content creators she barely knew in real life. I nodded. Of course. That's what mothers do, even when they feel invisible. I sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing out the folds of linen pants that all looked the same beige, off-white ecru. I made a quiet comment, just trying to connect. "I remember when you used to wear sunflowers and overalls. You lit up a room." She barely looked up from her phone. "Yeah, well, people evolve. I have to think about my grid now." Her grid. I thought of the photos taped inside my cookbook, the way her flour-covered fingers used to trace cookie shapes on wax paper, the handmade Mother's Day cards folded in thirds with crooked hearts. But none of that fit her grid. I wasn't angry, not yet. The anger would come later. At that moment, I just felt thin, paper thin, like one of those old carbon copies you write over and peel back faint blurred, and never the original. She didn't mean to be cruel. I don't believe that. But cruelty doesn't always come with intention. Sometimes it arrives quietly dressed in curated language and good lighting. Later that night, I opened my laptop and looked through my own folder of photos. There I was, me and her at the beach. Me teaching her to ride a bike. Me holding her hand at the school gate. I remembered how she used to beam when I walked into a room, how she used to introduce me proudly to everyone as my mom. She's the best cook in the world. And now I was a wrinkle in her story, a thing to be edited out. That night I didn't cry, but I did feel something shift, not loud, not sudden, just a small, silent rearranging inside me. A quiet whisper of truth I didn't want to hear but couldn't ignore anymore. She loved the version of me that fit her childhood, but the woman I'd become, aging, honest, a little worn around the edges, she didn't want that in her frame. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to wait for her to make room for me anymore. A week after the photo incident, I found myself standing in the hallway holding a box of my old porcelain dinnerware. It was the same set I had received on my wedding day, soft ivory plates with hand-painted violets around the rim, wrapped in yellowed tissue that still carried the faintest scent of lavender and thyme. I thought it would be perfect for the dinner party she was hosting, something to add warmth, story, soul. She was in the dining room fussing with her centerpiece, a tall, barren structure of bleached branches and dried moss. Not a single flower, not a single flicker of color, just sterile beauty arranged to impress rather than to nourish. I thought maybe we could use these tonight, I said, lifting the box as gently as if I were offering a baby bird. They mean a lot to me. I thought it would be lovely to have something passed down. She turned to look her face tight with politeness. Oh, that's sweet, Mom, but I already rented a set for tonight. Matte black stoneware, super minimal. She smiled like she was trying not to wince. Those are beautiful, but they don't really go with the tablescape. The tablescape. Not the meal, not the family, not the memory. The tablescape. I set the box down quietly, letting her get back to her planning. She was arranging tiny gold utensils beside linen napkins folded like origami. Everything had been choreographed, each glass in its place, each candle exactly 3 fingers apart. It looked like a showroom, cold and perfect. I sat on the edge of the couch and watched her for a moment. She was so sure of herself, so confident in her vision, and yet it felt like something was missing. There was no laughter in her preparations, no soul, just a constant checking and adjusting like the whole house was a stage and she, its only star. She didn't ask for my help. Not with the food, not with the music, not even with the lighting. She had hired a vibe consultant, whatever that was, and the woman hovered through the rooms like a museum curator, nodding and snapping photos for approval. I wandered into the kitchen, my sanctuary, hoping maybe I could find a corner to contribute. I saw a jar of my strawberry preserves on the shelf and smiled. I had made them just last summer. I thought maybe they'd go well with the goat cheese platter. But when I brought the jar out, she blinked at it like I'd handed her a dead bird. Mom, it's sweet of you, but we're going for more of a curated grazing experience. No labels. Just decanters and tiny boards. I nodded, lips pressed shut. My strawberry jam wasn't aesthetic enough. My preserves, like me, didn't fit the vibe. I returned the jar to the shelf and walked out to the garden. My hands trembled a little as I brushed soil off a potted basil plant. That's when I realized something. She wasn't building a home. She was building a brand. And brands don't have room for imperfection. For wrinkles, for old ladies with trembling hands and stories embedded in porcelain. I thought about how much time I'd spent planning meals that brought our family together. Thanksgivings where we spilled gravy on the tablecloth and laughed until our sides hurt. Birthdays where she'd blow out candles on a lopsided cake I made from scratch. None of those memories would have matched her current aesthetic. They'd be deemed messy or off-brand. But they were real. They were ours. That evening, before the guests arrived, I went to my room and pulled the curtains closed. I didn't have the energy to perform anymore. I wasn't a prop, a background piece, or a quaint antique to be used for nostalgia points. From my window, I could see the backyard glowing under fairy lights. Laughter floated up like perfume, and for a brief moment I closed my eyes and remembered her 5th birthday when she wore a tutu and danced barefoot through the grass crumbs on her face. Joy unfiltered and pure. She wasn't that little girl anymore, and I was no longer the mother she wanted to claim. She wanted designer tables and magazine spreads, and what I offered: love, presence, memory. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't marketable. It was just real. It started with a strange silence in the hallway, a hush I wasn't used to. Usually the mornings in our shared home carried a rhythm, my kettle clicking to life, birds gossiping by the window, the soft creak of floorboards greeting the sun. But that morning the air felt deliberate, as though something was being done that didn't want to be heard. I followed the soundless trail to the guest room, my old sewing room once filled with the smell of thread and tea. The door was half closed, but the sharp scent of lavender-scented cleaning wipes snuck out and caught me. I nudged the door open and stopped cold. There she was standing in front of my open closet, tossing sweaters into a large black bag like she was cleaning out a garage. Things weren't folded. They were being stripped, pulled from hangers like they were unwanted guests. Some of them still carried her childhood perfume. One sweater even had a button she'd sewn on herself when she was 10. What are you doing?" I asked softly. My voice cracked before I could stop it. She looked up startled for half a beat, then forced a smile. "Oh, I didn't think you'd be up yet. I was just clearing out some of the older stuff. The house was feeling cluttered. Don't worry, I'm donating it all. It'll go to someone who actually needs it." I stepped closer, slow and careful, like approaching a deer I wasn't sure would run. "Those aren't just old clothes. That's your father's cardigan. That's the blouse I wore to your graduation. Those I swallowed. Those are pieces of my life." She gave a light laugh. "Mom, they're just things. Let's not be sentimental. We have to let go of the past if we want to move forward. Let go." She said it like I'd been dragging a corpse behind me, as if the love I'd stitched into every fold of those garments was just dead weight now. I knelt by one of the bags and reached in, pulling out a shawl my mother gave me before she died. It still smelled faintly of jasmine and salt air. She'd worn it on her last visit to the seaside. "I wasn't ready to let this go," I whispered, cradling the fabric like a child. "You should have asked." Her face tightened just a little. "I was trying to do something helpful. You've been so stuck lately. It's time to refresh. This house needs a new energy." New energy. I looked around the room, my room, and suddenly it didn't look like mine anymore. The curtains had been changed, the quilt replaced. Even the bookshelf had been curated, half of my novels boxed up and replaced with stacks of white candles and books with blank spines. It was no longer a room for living. It was a room for appearing. She had redesigned my space while I was still living in it, as if I were just a temporary tenant in her aesthetic dream. And I realized she didn't just want to remove the clutter, she wanted to remove the parts of me that didn't match her current life. I rose slowly, wrapping the shawl around my shoulders. "When you were a girl," I said quietly, "you used to cry when I cleaned your room without asking. You said it felt like your little world had been broken into." She blinked. "That's different." "Is it?" I asked, "because this feels exactly the same." There was a long pause, the kind that fills the space between people when something tender is breaking. She looked at me, eyes slightly glassy, then turned away. "I'll keep a few things," she said a little too quickly, "if it means that much to you." But the damage had been done, not just to the clothes or the room, but to something far deeper. A thread between us had been pulled too tight, and I could feel it fraying. Later that evening, I sat in the garden with a blanket over my knees, watching dusk paint shadows across the lawn. I thought of the times I used to tuck her in layering quilt over quilt until she felt safe. And now here we were, unraveling in silence. I realized that she didn't see my history as something worth preserving. She saw it as a visual burden, an aesthetic inconvenience. And I began to wonder how many more parts of me would she quietly erase before I no longer recognized the life I had built. How many memories would she donate without asking? And why? Why was I still letting her? It was a Tuesday when I first saw them, two young women with bleached eyebrows and expensive-looking gym clothes lounging on the back porch of my home like they owned it. One of them had her phone propped on a tiny tripod, taking a slow-motion video of herself sipping coffee. The other was pacing barefoot, rehearsing a line into the air, like she was auditioning for something. I paused at the edge of the kitchen, peering through the window above the sink. For a moment I thought maybe my daughter had invited friends over. But these weren't friends. These were characters. Characters in her curated world. They had never been to our family dinners, never seen the cluttered junk drawer that held decades of tangled cords and birthday candles. I stepped outside politely. "Good morning," I said, trying not to sound like I was intruding on them. The one holding the coffee gave me a tight smile, the kind you give when someone has walked into your frame. "Hi, you must be her mom," she said, as if I were an extra on a set, a background actor brought in for realism. I blinked. "Yes, I live here." "Oh," she said not unkindly, just dismissively. "We're just doing some content today. Shouldn't take long." Content. I turned and walked inside, my heart beating a little too loudly. I found my daughter in the living room lighting candles and adjusting a silk throw that had never seen a nap, never known the weight of a body seeking rest. "Who are they?" I asked, voice carefully neutral. She didn't look up. "Clients, sort of. I'm renting out the guest house to creators who need short-term space. It's great passive income, and they love the aesthetic of the property." I stared at her. "You didn't tell me." She finally met my eyes. "I didn't think it was a big deal. You don't really use that space anymore, and I keep it clean. Plus, they're harmless. You barely even know they're here." I wanted to scream. But the scream didn't come. Instead, I felt something colder than rage settle inside me. Something like being told your presence is optional in your own life. She had handed parts of our home to strangers because they matched her vision, because they took pretty pictures and spoke in hashtags. Later that day, I tried to walk through the garden to collect herbs for dinner. One of the girls stopped me. "Sorry," she said gently. "Could you not go through there right now?" "We're shooting a picnic scene." I nodded like a stranger, like someone who didn't belong in the very place they had built. I turned back Herb's unpicked soul unsettled. I made pasta that night. Quiet, simple. My daughter didn't eat with me. She was in the guest house laughing with her new tenants, sipping from one of my wine glasses. I watched from the kitchen window. They had strung lights along the hedge, the same hedge I'd planted with her when she was 9. Back then, we'd laughed every time we got soil in our shoes. I remember how she danced through the hose spray and called me the queen of the backyard. Now the backyard was booked. I wasn't royalty anymore. I wasn't even staff. I was a ghost with keys. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I thought of how many doors I had unlocked for her, how many nights I stayed awake with worry, how many tears I kissed away without complaint. And now I couldn't even walk through my own garden without checking someone's content calendar. She called it progress. She called it efficiency. But I knew what it really was. It was a slow eviction, not of space, but of value. My life, my presence, my warmth. It no longer fit her algorithm. I began to wonder if I disappeared tomorrow. Would she even notice? Or would she simply say the energy had finally aligned? My birthday came quietly that year. No grand announcement, no clatter of pans in the morning, no scent of cinnamon rolls drifting down the hallway like they used to when she was little and wanted every occasion to begin with sweetness. I woke up to a faint rustling, her feet moving across the hardwood floor, with precision, her voice low as she directed someone over the phone. When I stepped into the kitchen, she looked up briefly and smiled. "Happy birthday, Mom," she said, her tone practiced. She handed me a small box, beautifully wrapped minimalist brown paper with a cream ribbon. I held it in my hand, suddenly afraid to open it. Inside was a candle, beige, scented neutral elegance. The label read in soft gold type. I turned it over once, twice. It didn't smell like anything at all. just a faint whiff of linen and silence. "Thank you," I said quietly. She nodded. "I thought it would suit your room. It's really calming." I placed the candle on the counter and tried to smile. "Are we doing dinner together tonight?" She hesitated. "Actually, I invited a few friends over. Just a small thing. I thought you'd prefer something quiet this year." "Quiet," I echoed the word a pebble, falling into a deep well. She went on talking about mood lighting and soft playlists. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "And if we could maybe not do balloons or decorations this year, I want to keep the dining area clean for photos. Nothing too colorful, you know." I nodded slowly. Of course. That evening I sat at the far end of the dining table, while her guests laughed and sipped imported wine. No one toasted. No one sang. Someone asked her, "Wait, whose birthday is it?" She laughed airily. "My mom's. She likes to keep it low-key." Low-key. I stared at the untouched birthday card she had placed beside my plate. It said gratitude on the front, and had no handwriting inside, just a tiny printed message. "Thank you for being a calming presence." I didn't recognize myself in those words. There was no cake, no candles, just a small white tart that matched the dinnerware. When I reached for a second bite, one of her friends gently shifted the plate and said, "Oh, sorry, we were going to get a photo of that." So I set down my fork. I let them take their pictures. I smiled when prompted. I faded into the aesthetic like a decorative throw that gets moved from chair to chair to make sure everything aligns. I excused myself early and returned to my room. I lit the candle she gave me not because I liked the scent, but because I needed something to hold. It flickered once, then again, but it gave off no warmth. I sat in my chair, my old floral upholstered chair that had survived 3 moves, 1 marriage and years of storytelling, and stared at the pale flame. How had it come to this? How had my birthday, my small moment of reflection and gratitude, become an inconvenience, an obstacle to be minimized for visual consistency? She had once made me cards with glitter and sticky notes. She had once sung off-key and danced with abandon in the kitchen. She had once looked at me like I was the sky she spun under. Now I was just a shadow in the frame. And I couldn't help but wonder if she gave that candle to me because she truly believed I wanted peace, or because she hoped I'd simply stop burning with any color at all. Later that night I blew it out, not angrily, just decisively. And in the dark I made a small vow I wouldn't fade like this again. She may have designed the party, but I would design the memory. I should have known what was coming the moment I walked into the living room and saw the wall was bare. It stopped me like a sudden gust of wind. Everything I'd arranged, everything I'd hung with care over the years gone, no warning, no explanation, just gone. The portraits, the old ones, my parents on their wedding day, sepia-toned and shy. My grandmother with her wide, soft hands folded in her lap, framed in simple wood. Even the cross-stitched family tree I'd made when she was 13, each name embroidered with shaking fingers and deep love. Gone. In their place were 3 square prints, beige on beige. One was an abstract blur, the other a pattern that looked like static, and the third, nothing. Just a blank canvas in a frame. It looked expensive. It also looked empty. My daughter stood back admiring the symmetry like she was placing mirrors in a gallery. "Doesn't it feel more open now?" she asked. "So much cleaner." The room breathes. I walked forward slowly. I wasn't angry, not yet. I just felt unstitched, like someone had come in while I slept and reordered the story of our family, cut out the chapters with meaning, and replaced them with mood boards. "Where are the photos?" I asked, my voice more fragile than I wanted it to be. She waved a hand, not cruelly, just dismissively. Don't worry, they're safe. I put them in storage. I want to digitize them eventually, but for now they were just making everything feel dated. Dated. That word struck me harder than it should have. I'd heard it before attached to clothes, music ideas, but never to faces, never to people. I looked at her and something inside me wilted. Those weren't decorations, I said quietly. They were our history. They were the roots of this family. She sighed. I know, but when people walk in here, I want them to see something timeless, something curated, not cluttered memories. Cluttered. I turned away and sat down, pressing my palm against the empty place on the wall where her father's photo used to hang. He died when she was 16. She'd cried for 3 days and slept in my bed like she was 5 again. Now he was clutter. I remembered him laughing in this very room, telling corny jokes, playing records too loud. And I remembered how he used to pull her into his lap and point to each ancestor in the tree, saying, "That's where your strength comes from. Don't you forget it." And now she had forgotten it, not out of malice, just trend. She didn't want our roots on display. She wanted something aspirational, sterile, unattached. And I began to realize this wasn't just about the photos or the furniture. It was about the very soul of the house I had filled with warmth, food, tears, music, grief, healing. She was bleaching it, whiting it out. Because that's what you do with old pages when they don't match the design. Later that evening, I crept into the storage room and opened the bins where she'd placed everything. I held the picture of my parents like a relic. Their eyes stared back at me, still kind, knowing. I whispered, "I'm sorry," though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to, my ancestors or myself. I brought the photo back to my room and leaned it on my bedside table next to the candle she had given me. The candle was still untouched, and now the picture frame stared beside it, defiantly warm in its age and imperfection. As I lay in bed, I thought about what she was trying to build, a brand, a look, a world that was pretty but hollow, a house that was beautiful, yes, but cold in places it used to sing. And I knew then with a quiet certainty that if I didn't start holding on to what mattered, it would all be repainted out of existence. Not just the photos, but the truth. The story of who we were, of who I was. And I was not going to let myself be digitized into silence. He rang the doorbell on a Thursday afternoon. I was upstairs folding laundry, the kind of quiet, methodical chore that gives your hands purpose when your heart doesn't know where to settle. I wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not him. When I opened the door, he stood there with a cardboard box in his arms, wearing that same slightly too big jacket, and those eyes that always looked like they carried more truth than he was allowed to say. Her ex, the one she'd dated for 3 years, the one who used to fix our leaky faucets without asking, the one who stayed late after family dinners to help me wash dishes while everyone else drifted into the glow of their phones. I hadn't seen him since she ended things abruptly, if I recall. Something about different paths, energy mismatches. She'd said he wasn't aligned with her growth, but he still remembered me. "Hi," he said gently. I found a few of her old things, thought I'd return them. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked quietly, respectfully, like someone who remembered how this house used to feel, like a home, not a set. He placed the box on the hallway bench and straightened up. "You look well, Mrs." He caught himself. "Sorry, you still go by." I smiled the first real smile I'd worn in days. Still me. He nodded, and there was something in his eyes, something tender, not pitying, something that said, "I see what's changed here, too." I offered him tea out of habit. He accepted, and we moved to the kitchen. He took the same seat he always used to. I poured chamomile and slid the sugar bowl closer than necessary just to feel like I was still allowed to care for someone. We didn't talk about her at first. We talked about the basil plant near the sink, about the dog he was thinking of adopting, about how quiet the house had gotten. And then as he stirred his tea, he looked around and said, "It feels different in here." I nodded. "It is." She redesigned it all. She redesigned a lot of things. There was a silence then, thick like honey, left too long on the spoon. Then he said softly, "She always did have a strong sense of direction." That made me laugh, not bitterly, just knowingly. "She has a map no one else is allowed to hold," I said. He smiled, but his eyes looked tired. "I never told her this," he said, "but I used to come by early just to talk to you in the garden. It was the best part of my week. You made the world feel slow again." I swallowed hard. "You listened," he added. "She was always looking ahead. You were here." I wanted to reach out and touch his hand to say thank you for seeing me, but I didn't. Instead, I looked down at my chipped teacup, the one my daughter kept saying I should replace with a matching set. He stood after a while, polite as ever, said he'd best be going. I walked him to the door, but just before he stepped out, he paused. "You know," he said, "I always thought this house had a kind of soul, the kind that comes from someone loving it long enough." I nodded. "That soul's still here, just hiding under layers of paint." He gave me one of those long looks, the kind that people don't give each other much anymore, the kind that says, "I remember who you are." And then he left. I stood at the door long after it closed, staring out at the driveway. I don't know why I felt it then, but I felt something shift. Not a spark, not a romantic swell, just recognition. The way it feels when someone returns a piece of you didn't know had gone missing. He didn't fit her aesthetic anymore, but he fit this house. He fit the rhythm of what we used to be. And as I turned back into the stillness, I knew I'd be seeing him again. Not for her, for me. It began as a simple thank you, a polite gesture on my part after that unexpected visit. He had returned something of hers, but ended up returning something I hadn't realized. I'd lost conversation that didn't feel filtered, so the next week I called him. I told myself it was to offer him a jar of my strawberry jam when I hadn't given to my daughter, because she said it clashed with the grazing aesthetic. But truthfully, I just wanted to talk. He came by on a Tuesday late morning. I served tea on the back porch using the blue china set my daughter once called old world clutter. I laid out lemon cookies in a circle, uneven but soft, and I didn't bother photographing them before they were touched. He smiled when he saw the setup. "This is what a table should look like," he said. "Used, alive." We sat beneath the arbor where the roses had started to wilt in the summer heat. The wind teased the leaves into soft applause. He asked about my plants. I asked about his work. We talked about books, about dogs, about nothing and everything. And when the silence came, it wasn't awkward. It was warm, restful. That became our rhythm. Every Tuesday, he'd come by for an hour or two. We never planned it formally. It just happened. Some weeks he brought something scones from the bakery or a half-dead orchid he'd rescued from the clearance rack. Some weeks I baked, though my hands weren't as steady as they used to be. We started tending the garden together, the patch that had once been hers as a child, where she'd grown strawberries and placed plastic fairies among the vines. He knelt beside me as I pulled weeds, and we laughed over the crooked tomato cages and bent stakes. He never asked about her unless I mentioned her. He never pried. But once as we watered the lavender, he said gently, "I don't think she sees what she's standing on. It's like she's trying to float above it all instead of growing from it." I said nothing, but I heard it. I let the words sit soft and sad like fallen petals. And for the first time in years, I felt seen, not just by his eyes, but by the way he showed up quietly, regularly, without asking me to be anything but myself. I didn't need to match a palette or mute my feelings. I could laugh too loud, tell old stories, cry if I needed. One afternoon after he left, I stood in the kitchen looking at the extra cup I hadn't yet put in the sink, and I felt something rise in me. Not desire, no, not romance exactly. It was more sacred than that. It was dignity. It was connection. And it had nothing to do with how the house looked, or how many followers she had, or whether the guest house was being rented out. It had to do with this quiet understanding between two people left behind by someone who had outgrown her roots. He fit here not because he was perfect, but because he remembered the feel of real wood, the crackle of worn books, the way tea tasted better when shared with someone who listened. I kept our visits to myself, not out of secrecy but preservation. I didn't want our time to be turned into a storyline, or a caption, or something she would critique. It was mine. It was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a faded painting in someone else's gallery. I felt like the painter. It was a Thursday afternoon when I came home from the market arms, heavy with groceries, the sun pressing hot against my shoulders. I remember thinking how nice it would be to take a nap in my favorite armchair, the one by the window that caught the late light and held it like a memory. I was even humming to myself as I unlocked the door. But when I stepped inside, something was wrong. It was too quiet. Not the usual peaceful quiet, but an unnatural stillness like the air had been rearranged. I set the bags down and walked toward my bedroom, and that's when I saw it. The wallpaper, my wallpaper, was gone. The soft floral pattern, faded with years and laced with stories, had been painted over with an off-white shade that looked like primer, cold, blank, like a rental. My bedspread had been replaced with a beige linen cover, stiff and angular, and the armchair, my armchair, the one I had sat in every day since her father passed, was missing. In its place was a low Scandinavian bench, the kind you see in catalogs but never actually want to sit on. I couldn't move at first. I just stood in the doorway, staring at the hollow that had once been my sanctuary. My daughter appeared in the hallway, hair swept into a perfect bun, holding a paintbrush in one hand and a fabric swatch in the other. "Oh, you're home early," she said, as if she hadn't just gutted the one room that still belonged to me. "What happened here?" I asked, my voice so low I barely heard it myself. She beamed like she'd just given me a surprise party. "I did a mini makeover. I wanted to brighten up your space, make it more cohesive with the rest of the house. Doesn't it feel calmer?" I stepped inside feeling like an intruder in my own life. The photographs on the dresser were gone. The old lamp with its crocheted doily had been replaced by a geometric cube that barely gave off light. Even my curtains were gone, replaced by sheer panels that offered no privacy, no softness. "Where's my chair?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. She shrugged. "I had it taken to the donation center. It was really worn out, Mom, and the style didn't match anything." It was my chair. Her smile faltered just for a second. It was falling apart. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the fabric crisp beneath me. Everything smelled of lemon oil and strangers. "You should have asked me," I said, but my voice sounded so far away like it was echoing down a hallway. She no longer walked. "I was trying to help," she said defensively. "You've been so still lately. I thought maybe if the space felt more alive, you would too." More alive. As if being quiet, being constant being here was somehow a form of dying. "I was already alive," I said, standing slowly. I was living in the things you just erased. She looked at me with confusion, true confusion, like she didn't understand how someone could be so attached to what she called visual noise. To her, it was just aesthetics. To me, it was evidence. Evidence that I had existed, that I had made a life here, that I had filled these walls with more than just design, with breath, with grief, with love. That night, I didn't sleep in that bed. I took a blanket and sat in the garden instead, surrounded by my herbs and my memories. The stars blinked softly above, indifferent and kind. I looked toward the guest house, quiet, now unlit, and I thought of him, of our quiet Tuesdays, of his gentle eyes, when he looked at the life I'd built and saw value, not clutter. That was the moment the decision began to form, not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of something purer, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. The soft kind. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that simply moves. I knew then I had to reclaim more than my room. I had to reclaim myself. 2 days after she repainted my bedroom, we attended a family gathering, something distant, a cousin's engagement or a baby shower I don't quite remember anymore. All I recall is the setting, a pristine pale room filled with people posing for moments they would later call memories filtered and frozen in feeds. I wore a soft green dress I'd had for years, one I always felt lovely in, though I knew even before walking out the door that it wouldn't match the vibe. My daughter wore bone white, minimal jewelry, hair slicked back like a gallery sculpture. She didn't compliment my dress. She didn't even look twice at it. But I caught her glancing at me once, her eyes flickering with something between embarrassment and calculation. During the event, we sat at a round table with some of her friends, all young, all curated. They spoke in a language of trends and cycles of brand partnerships and personal growth narratives. I sipped my tea, slowly smiled when appropriate, and remained quiet until one of them looked at me and said, laughing, "Your daughters told us all about you, the vintage energy in the house." They laughed softly, affectionately, as though they'd shared an inside joke. Vintage energy. I smiled. I smiled so hard it hurt. I smiled until my cheeks trembled. I said, "Well, I suppose someone has to be the antique centerpiece." More laughter. No one noticed that my hands were trembling under the table. Later, as we took group photos in front of a balloon arch, I was handed a beige shawl and told, "Just throw this on, makes everything look more cohesive." It wasn't even mine. It still had a price tag on the underside. I draped it over my shoulders and smiled again, because that's what I had learned to do. Smile, soften, shrink. But inside something was unraveling. When we got home that night, she flopped onto the couch, scrolling through her photos. "Oh," she murmured, "we got some good ones. You looked sweet. Sweet. Like a cookie, like a placemat, like something to put out when company's over." I nodded and made tea. She didn't notice how I stirred the spoon harder than I needed to. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering how she used to run to me when she fell, how she once said, I was the strongest woman in the world, and now I was a soft background, a texture, a harmless fixture in a room she'd redesigned. She didn't see me anymore. She saw a mood, a palette, a personality prop. But I was done being muted. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her with fireworks or fists. That's never been my way. But in the silence, I felt it. The scream behind the smile. It stretched back through every moment I'd been cropped out, covered up, spoken over, reduced to something pastel and pleasing. It was made of the birthday that wasn't mine, of the garden I couldn't walk through, of the photos that vanished, the chair that disappeared, the memories boxed up and buried in closets like shame. I sat in my bed holding the old shawl my mother left me, the one with real weight, real warmth, and I thought I don't need to be part of her story if her story doesn't make space for truth. That was the night I stopped waiting to be seen. I didn't rage, I didn't demand, but inside me a quiet thunder gathered, and I knew it was time to act. The next morning was cool and gray, the kind of weather that makes you think deeply without meaning to. I woke before dawn, the air still and full of questions. There was something in the silence that morning that didn't feel empty. It felt ready. I made myself tea slowly, deliberately. No rush, no performance. Just me and the clink of the spoon against ceramic, the faint rattle of my breath in my chest. I drank it without sugar. I wanted to taste things clearly that day. I walked through the house and paused in each room. The living room with its magazine-perfected arrangement where not a single cushion looked like it had ever known a back. The kitchen stripped of warmth and clutter where even the fruit bowl held only green apples for the sake of color coordination. And then finally my room neutralized, bleached of memory, as though love had never been allowed to settle here. I sat at the small writing desk in the corner, the only piece of furniture she hadn't replaced, probably because it was hidden behind the door. I opened the drawer and pulled out my worn leather address book, the one with names crossed out from years of funerals and faded friendships. I found the number. My lawyer answered on the second ring, a man I'd known since before she was born. He used to attend our dinner parties back when dinner was messy and real and full of stories that never fit into captions. "Hello, Helen," he said, voice still gravelly and familiar. "I want to revise my will," I told him. He was quiet for a moment. "All right. Anything specific?" I paused, everything I said softly. I want everything to reflect what matters, not what looks good. We set a meeting for the next afternoon. I hung up, placed the phone gently on the desk, and exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. That same afternoon I made another call. To the man who had been coming to my garden every Tuesday, the one who returned my stories to me, the one she had cast aside without thought. "Would you mind meeting me tomorrow?" I asked. "There's something I want to talk to you about." He didn't hesitate, of course. I slept well that night. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I slept without bracing myself. I didn't dream, or if I did, I don't remember it. All I know is that I woke up the next day, knowing I was doing something right, not just for myself, but for everything this home once stood for. At the lawyer's office, I sat across from him with my hands folded tightly. I gave instructions slowly, clearly. I revised the terms of my estate. I altered the deed on the guesthouse. I adjusted beneficiaries and donations. Every line I changed felt like a stitch, mending something inside me. When I was done, he looked at me kindly. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I've never been more sure." On my way out, I caught my reflection in the building's glass door. I looked older than I remembered, but not smaller, not invisible. I saw my mother's spine in my posture. I saw my grandmother's mouth in the line of my lips. I saw someone real. When I got home, she wasn't there. Out for meetings, likely, or at some showroom cafe full of artfully disheveled lattes and people who only speak in soft lighting. The house was quiet, and I liked it that way. I sat on the front porch with a bowl of cherries, pit after pit collecting in a chipped saucer. Each one felt like a small goodbye farewell to the woman who waited, who hoped, who tried to make herself fit into frames, not built for truth. This was the beginning of the end. Not of love necessarily, but of pretending, of shrinking, of smiling through small cuts. I had made the calls. I had shifted the foundation. And soon the keys would change hands, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. Because some homes are meant to shelter more than just style. They are meant to hold stories. And I was taking mine back. The sun was just beginning to slip past the edges of the roof when he arrived, same soft knock, same patient presence. He didn't bring flowers or pastries this time, just himself, and that was enough. I opened the door, and for a moment, we stood without words, just looking at each other. I stepped aside and he walked in, brushing his fingers along the edge of the hallway console, pausing at the family tree now exiled to my room. He didn't ask why I'd called. He trusted me enough not to. I led him to the guest house. The door creaked, like it always did, never quite fixed, never quite broken. It opened into a space that had been many things over the years, a playroom once, then a storage space, later a quiet corner for her studying. Lately, it had become a rental backdrop for other people's dreams, but not anymore. I opened my hand. In my palm were the keys. "I want you to have this," I said. He looked at me carefully, head tilted as though unsure if I was joking. The guest house. I nodded. He took a small step back. I can't. I mean, I'd love to help with anything you need, but I don't need help, I said gently. I need someone in this space who sees it, someone who respects it, someone who doesn't walk through here and think about lighting angles and filtered impressions, someone who knows what it means to be real. Still he hesitated, so I stepped forward and pressed the keys into his hand. She said I didn't fit her aesthetic. I said, my voice a little steadier than I expected. But you fit this house. Not because of your clothes, not because of how you talk. Because you care. Because you sit and listen and leave something behind other than silence. His fingers closed around the keys slowly, like he was afraid they might disappear if he moved too quickly. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Don't say anything, I replied. Just be here. We walked through the guest house together. He touched the bookshelves I had lined with forgotten paperbacks. He opened the window to let in air. He knelt to pick up a leaf that had slipped through the threshold. He belonged here. Not in the curated sense, but in the soul of the space sense, the one that matters. When we came back outside, we sat on the back steps, shoulder to shoulder, saying very little. I told him the papers had been signed, that the place was his to live in if he wanted, that he owed me nothing except truth. He turned toward me, eyes wet at the corners. You don't know what this means. Oh, I said, smiling softly, I do. We sat until the sky turned to soft blue velvet. The house behind us glowed from within its heart, newly awake, like it had just remembered something important. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I felt like the owner. I felt like the woman I had been before motherhood blurred my edges, before silence became my armor, before I mistook invisibility for grace. The man beside me didn't try to fix anything. He didn't praise me for being brave. He just stayed. And somehow that made all the difference. The keys were his now. But the choice, the moment that belonged to me. It didn't take long for her to find out. Maybe a neighbor mentioned it. Maybe she saw something out of place. Or maybe she felt the shift. That slight change in the air when something you thought you controlled quietly stops belonging to you. She came home in a rush, heels clicking too hard against the tile breath, just slightly louder than necessary. I was in the kitchen slicing apples. The window was open. The day was calm. She didn't say hello. She walked straight to me and dropped her bag on the counter. Did you give the guest house to him? She asked, voice tight, cold, already sharpening into the shape of blame. I looked up and met her eyes. Yes, I said. The word landed like glass on concrete, sharp, irrevocable. Her lips parted. Are you serious? I've never been more. She started pacing. You didn't even ask me. You didn't discuss it. That house is part of my plan. I had clients lined up for months. You've sabotaged. It's not your house, I said quietly. It never was. She stopped pacing. Her eyes went wide, then narrow. What do you mean it's not mine? You promised. You said this house would be mine one day. You said everything was going to me. I set down the knife and wiped my hands slowly, and then you told me I didn't belong in your aesthetic, that my memories were clutter, that I was off-brand. I didn't mean it like that. But you did, I said, my voice like slow-moving water, firm and cold, maybe not cruelly, but you meant it. She opened her mouth to protest, but I kept going. You cleared my closet without asking, painted over my bedroom, turned our home into a showroom, rented out the spaces I built with love. You wanted my presence gone, but you wanted the property to stay. You can't have both. She flinched just slightly. So what you gave it to him, the man I broke up with, that's revenge. No, I said, shaking my head. It's memory. It's protection. It's a gift to someone who saw the soul in this place, someone who came by each week and didn't try to curate me. You're punishing me. No, I said again, gently this time. I'm setting you free. She stared at me, breath heaving, like she didn't recognize the woman standing before her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she'd only ever seen me as the quiet, ever-agreeable mother. The one who adjusted, who faded, who made tea and kept her thoughts polite. But I wasn't that anymore. I wasn't angry, not in the way she expected. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't shaking. I was calm. And calmness, I've learned, is power when silence has been mistaken for weakness too many times. I changed the will, I said. I adjusted the deed. You'll still have things. I didn't cut you out of my life, but I reclaimed what you kept trying to erase. Her eyes brimmed not with sorrow but with disbelief. You really did this. I had to, I whispered, before I disappeared completely. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind brushing against the kitchen windows and the ticking of the clock above the stove. Then she turned, snatched her bag, and walked out. No slamming doors, no final words, just the sound of heels fading down the hallway, like a memory trying to make an exit before it can be held accountable. I stood alone, the knife still resting by the apples. The slices had browned at the edges, soft with time, and I realized I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel broken. I felt real, more than I had in years. She might come back one day, she might not. But whether she did or didn't, I had already come back to myself. The next few days were quiet in a way that didn't ache. Not the silence of being ignored, or the silence of walking on eggshells, but a stillness that came from knowing the storm had passed and nothing needed to be said anymore. She didn't come home. There was no dramatic exit, no suitcase by the door, just absence, like a room that has finally exhaled once the tension leaves it. I didn't chase her. I didn't call. I didn't apologize. Instead, I swept the kitchen floor. I watered the plants. I rearranged the furniture not to make it match a theme, but to make it comfortable again. Lived in. Honest. I pulled my old armchair out from the corner of the garage where she'd shoved it without ceremony weeks ago. It smelled of dust and time, but the moment I sat in it, it welcomed me like an old friend. I stitched the worn seam on its arm, not perfectly, but with care. I returned the quilt to its back and placed the same picture of my parents on the table beside it. I didn't need new wallpaper. I didn't need filtered lighting. I needed truth. And truth, I realized, doesn't always come with pretty edges. The man who now lived in the guest house came by that evening, holding 2 mugs of tea and a basket of plums from his walk. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just sat beside me and we watched the wind move through the trees without needing to fill the air with words. He fit here, not just in the space but in the pause. There were still marks on the wall where the family portraits used to hang. She had spackled them over, left the paint uneven. I ran my fingers across those lines and decided not to cover them up. Let them stay, a reminder, a scar, evidence of memory. In the mornings, I opened the windows and let the birds in again. I cooked meals the old way, without measuring, without photographing with love. I played records. I wore colors. I put the handmade tablecloth back on, stains and all. The house breathed again. Not like before, because I wasn't who I was before, but in a new way, a slower, deeper rhythm, a home that remembered itself after pretending too long to be something it wasn't. Sometimes I still hear her words in my mind. You ruin the aesthetic. And maybe I do. But aesthetics don't hold your hand when you're sick. Aesthetics don't call you at midnight when the world falls apart. Aesthetics don't sit beside you for hours when you've lost someone you loved. People do. Love does. She may come back one day. She may knock on that same door softer this time, older, maybe wiser. Or maybe she won't. Maybe she'll stay in her curated world, polished and presentable. I'll be here either way. Not waiting, just living. Because some beauty doesn't need an audience. It just needs peace. And I found mine in the quiet. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to remember my worth. Some endings are just beginnings with the noise turned off. I gave her silence, and in it I found myself. The days pass gently now, slower like syrup down the side of a warm mug. I rise early, not because I have to, but because I want to feel the morning light trace its way across the kitchen tiles. The hush of this new chapter doesn't frighten me anymore. It soothes. It wraps around my bones like a familiar shawl, worn but true. Sometimes I still miss her laughter, the child's laughter, not the curated smile of the woman she became. I wonder if she remembers the smell of our garden, or the way she used to bury her face in my sweater and whisper, "Don't ever change. Life has a way of changing us anyway, doesn't it?" Quietly then, all at once. But I've learned something. Dignity isn't found in being understood. It's found in standing tall even when you're not, in holding your ground when others would rather you soften, disappear, match the wallpaper. And sometimes giving things away, keys, rooms, pieces of history, isn't loss. It's reclamation. It's proof that we still have the power to choose what stays and what no longer serves us. I sit in my chair, tea warming my hands, wind moving through the curtains that I chose for comfort, not approval. And in this quiet, I hear the heartbeat of the home again. Not hers. Mine. No hashtags, no filters. Just peace.